Hi guys, how are you? And welcome to Wavlength. Wavlength is an idea that our friend Victor has thought of, and we would just like to explain it to you. This is Victor. He is the CEO of Wavlength. He is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the reason he is deciding to create Wavlength is because he wants to take all artists around the world and let them have a platform to share their music and understand everything about all their music. He wants to legitimize independent artists one by one, and he wants everyone to have their own brand and have a way to show their love for music.
We actually had the opportunity to speak with Victor in person. A couple things that he emphasized was the idea of starting a podcast or a vlog, which is a video blog. So he would interview these artists and actually have the one-to-one conversation with them about their story, their opportunities in life, etc. He wants to focus on something small, and expand on to something bigger. So starting with just independent artist stories, things like that, and changing it into an entire music platform. The Wavlength could be used as a directory for unknown artists. I'll get into that in a little bit. He wants to also start a Wavlength index, which will be a rating system for these artists. There will be a bunch of variables that can contribute to the index score, and if your score is high enough, then you will get a verified type symbol, think of Twitter or Instagram, to show that these artists are prominent in the Wavlength industry. Consulting is also something that we discussed with him. Maybe starting a music festival like Firefly, but geared toward Wavlength and the artists that have come up on Wavlength. Booking information will also be available on the site. Victor also wants to cut out the agents, so there's no money-making machine, and possibly adding a contractual legal obligation so there's no interference between the two. So an independent artist, also known as an underground hip-hop artist, is signed either to an independent label or none at all. So Macklemore was an independent artist, for example. They own the masters to their music, and they gain fans by performing locally and worldwide. They typically do everything themselves, like selling their own merch, making their own name, and getting their music out to the public.
The indirect competitors for Wavlength are SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Music. These are the streaming giants, and they stream all of the big artists. The goal here is to get our Wavlength customers on these platforms. And then the direct competitor will be Bandcamp. Bandcamp is streaming for new artists, and they give daily news on certain artists and top picks.
The first thing that Wavlength gives to its users is the connections of not only the artists to the fans, but artists to other artists. A future part of Wavlength will be the connections that artists will be able to make with each other and potentially collaborate in the future. We believe that Wavlength is better than a personal website or any social media page because it gives the fans access to the entirety of the artist's story, their merchandise, as well as also their music. And everything is on one page instead of bouncing around between social media and or a personal website. And Wavlength also offers the storytelling aspect of blending music and life together, which we believe is the key to Wavlength's success.
We were asked to look into some of the pros and cons of venture capital funding for the company. We believe some of the pros are that there'll be a whole lot of money available through venture capital funding as opposed to funding from other sources. Through venture capital funding, there's also the availability of a lot of connections to other companies and through other industries that could help Wavlength. Some of the cons are that part of the vision of Victor and of the company as a whole could be lost when you're giving up equity, you're taking in some money, and with that you lose some control over the company and what happens within the business when you are taking in money from other people. With that being said, we do believe that the pros outweigh the cons and that Wavlength should look into getting funding from a venture capital firm. Wavlength asked us to look into some of the ways in which their recruitment strategies should be budgeted. We believe things like giving away gear with the cool logo on it, providing bonuses to artists that get a lot of users and a lot of views, using social media advertising, and even having concerts for independent artists are all strategies that could be used. By utilizing the funding, we believe that a budget of $40,000 can get a good amount of this done, and ideally $80,000 to $100,000 would really be able to give the company a great start to bring in a lot of artists and users.
The timeline for Wavlength is when the beta will be launching in late July, and this will be the first step towards Wavlength growing to its fullest potential. The first year of Wavlength being operational is more about gaining interest and marketing of Wavlength than it is about selling the merchandise and getting these artists educated. Once there's a market and an established market for Wavlength, we can introduce Wavlength alumni, who are artists that have either used Wavlength and signed a record deal or used Wavlength and continue to grow without one. With the Wavlength Heat Index to show trending artists like we've mentioned previously, it will really give users a more intuitive experience, and they will be able to see artists that we think they will like the best. And after Wavlength is established with around 2,000 artists, we believe that Wavlength should now look into first round VC as opposed to the angel investors that they would be following.
In conclusion, we believe that Wavlength is in a phenomenal position looking forward. If they're able to utilize their connections and make more connections, we believe that the company will get off to a great start. The by far most important thing is that the people that the company has internally and the people that the company surrounds itself with does a great job and is committed to the vision of the company, because for any business, that is really what makes or breaks their success.
Thank you so much, guys. We appreciate everything.